G'day Pitmasters. Today we've got a small beef brisket point end that we're going to put on the Matador bullet smoker, smoke it at 250 to 275 Fahrenheit throughout the afternoon today. And the plan is to shred this thing up and put it into pies. So whether that happens or not, we'll see. But anyway, I'm going to run you through the cook and how we're going to prepare this meat right here. Let's get to it. Right, so here we've got our brisket point end already. There's not a whole lot of fat on the cap side, so what we're going to do is just going to trim it down to about 1/4 inch on both sides, and then leave enough fat there to render and marble down throughout the rest of the meat. And then we're going to get the smoker fired up and chuck it on. So let's get this thing trimmed down. Okay, brisket's all trimmed up, and we're going to use Holy Cow Meat Church rub. This is a great split of salt and pepper, bit of garlic, onion powder, a few other things in there. Goes perfect for a nice cut up brisket point end. So let's rub this thing up and get it on the pit. Now, one thing is when rubbing up your meat, depending on the cut of the cut of the meat and how big it is going to depend how much rub you want to use. You want to use a pretty liberal amount that you're going to get a really nice crispy bark form, but you also want to make sure that the meat shines through. It's the meat flavor that you want to present and the smokiness of the protein, and then you want the bark and the rub to be an additional flavor source. You do not want that to overpower the beef, especially on a nice cut of meat like a brisket. So we're going to rub it that side, rub it in, and then turn it over, same thing on the pit. Today to fire up the smoker is lump charcoal. So I'm going to show you how to load the bullet smoker up using lump. So what I've done is sort of like a minion method, which is basically you put the unlit coals around the outside and we pour the lit coals into the middle, and the idea here is that the lit coals will eventually, over the course of the cook, will spread out and catch light to the unlit coals to give us a really lengthy, long fuel and fire time. Now we're using lump charcoal, so it's not as neat as a nice circle, doesn't look as presentable as using charcoal briquettes, but the logic is exactly the same. And so we're going to pour these in and make it happen. Pour these in there, right into the center. So those coals are lit in the middle, and they're going to eventually catch light to the ones around the outside over the course of the cook. Added smoke flavour, I'm going to use some hickory wood, and what I'm going to do is place it around the edges on the unlit coals. That way they slowly smoulder and catch light as the fire begins to grow. And what we'll do is we'll probably place one on the outside too, directly on the lit ones to get that smoke going. And once the white acidy smoke's gone and the thin blue smoke begins to come through, we'll start to get the food on. We'll place the rest of the pit on top, lock it in, and get to the water pan. Both sides here. Go. Now to start with, we want to have all these vents open. That way the oxygen gets through to the fire and raises the temp. And of course, to start with, we always want to have this the exhaust vent always open, or at least 3/4 of the way open. That way the oxygen flows through to the fire, flows up through the top, and comes out the top damper at the exhaust. Once the temperature gets to where we want, we'll start to close off the vents. The reason these bullet smokers are also called water smokers is because there is a water pan in there above the charcoal basket that acts as a heat sink. Now, manufacturers recommend fill that up right before you start the fire. That way it absorbs the heat, and the water also sort of helps evaporate and keep the meat moist. But what I recommend is, and what a lot of pitmasters actually recommend is, wait for the heat to go up, and once you've dialed it in and you see the heat start to fluctuate, fill it up with water as you go, as needed. So put a little bit in, see where it holds the heat. If you need more, add more. And as that water evaporates and leaves, if you find you're losing your heat control, and you've already messed around with the dampers and you've got enough charcoal in there, then you can top it up with more water. So that's what I do. So right now, I'm just going to do that. I'm going to put 1 bottle of water in the water pan to begin with, and see how it holds. Hands in here, and we're just gonna load that in to begin with. See how we go. Right, loaded that up with just, one empty bottle, and we'll see how that temp gets to go. We want this thing getting to about 250 Fahrenheit, and then we'll try and lock it in. Our charcoal in there, and our wood's starting to ignite, and as it does, and the oxygen gets to that hickory wood chunk, once it gets a clean burn, that white acid sort of smoke will begin to leave, and we'll get that thin blue smoke rolling, should be up to temperature, and then we can put our meat in. But that's what we need. We need those logs to catch light, just like it is now, and start to get a clean burn. And that's all going to be reliant on the oxygen flow coming in and making minor adjustments to these vents. Now, the reason I say minor adjustments is because you can overshoot this. Make such large adjustments to this that you trying to avoid it under, not raising temp or going too high, and you change it drastically and open it or close it all the way, and then within 10 minutes, it's shot out of control, and you're going to have all these heat fluctuations, and it's going to ruin your cook. Make minor adjustments, wait 10 minutes and see what it does. And if you need to adjust more up or down, then do that. But minor adjustments are the key when playing with the fire and the oxygen and making sure you can manage the temperature correctly. Now, another tip here, if you can't seem to get enough oxygen through your for your dampers, you should be able to, but if for whatever reason you can't and you can see your temps quickly fluctuating, a really quick fix, I avoid it if I can, but a good quick fix is just quickly open the door to the firebox, so that the logs can quickly catch light, and you get rid of that white acid smoke, and hopefully the flames fire straight up and give you some heat back in, and then reshut your door. Pits at 250 Fahrenheit. Let's get them on. Pretty much almost where we want it, so let's get this thing on. Brisket is a long cook. You don't want to be messing around, so use a meat thermometer. I'm using the Smart Meter Plus Bluetooth thermometer to monitor this thing right through to the end of the cook. So you're gonna the tip with these long read thermometers, whether it's a probed one or a wireless one, is always insert it into the thickest part of the meat. That way you know that the biggest part of the side is going to be cooked right all the way through. This one's pretty good because in the one probe it's going to read the internal meat temperature as well as the ambient pit temperature at the end. So it's a good little, pits up to temp. We're going to lift the lid off here, put the meat on the grill grate, and we're ready to go. It goes back on. Our temp dropped a little bit, obviously, because we took the lid off and some heat escaped, but it should get back up pretty quickly. Once it gets really between that 250, 275 Fahrenheit, we're going to dial in our dampers, shut our exhaust a little more, and try and hold that temp. And if we need to, we may top up the water pan, but I like to avoid that where I can. I don't know if you can see that in the footage, but that smoke is what we're aiming for. It needs to be so subtle. It needs to be a thin blue colour. That's what you want. It shouldn't be that white, porous, acidic smoke. What you're aiming for is a nice smell, the sweet, blue, thin smoke. You should see very, very lightly visible or not visible at all. That's what we're aiming for when we want that clean, clear, thin blue smoke. A slight fluctuation. The heat started to really jump up as the coals broke down and got really hot. Closed off the dampers, too little too late, shot from 250 to like 290 Fahrenheit. So one thing I did do is I had the little water container ready and filled it up, and it's just going to act as a heat sink and stabilize that temperature. Hopefully bring it down, the water will absorb it, and water temperature changes less frequently and drastically as air. So it's going to bring that temperature down. I can already see it dropping down, and it should stabilize it around the 250 mark. So again, you need to keep an eye on it, you need to adjust as required, and just keep going. Little tip is, whilst it's like something you'll rarely have to do, but sometimes just a little poke of the fire, as most people might know, have a fireplace and stuff, a little poke of the fire, and poking the coals and stuff, can just be enough to trigger the oxygen to move and the flames to start igniting again. Well, same with these bullet smokers, sometimes just a little blow directly over the coals is enough to get a bit of oxygen moving. So this fire was a little stagnant, and I just, a little bit of a, and you see it starts to, it just starts to get a bit of airflow and some oxygen in there, and just, sometimes that's all it needs. Here are about 4 hours in, let's have a look at this thing. Oh, look at that buck. After keeping an eye on the temperature, dealing with temp fluctuations, cooking for about 6 hours or so, I think we're almost ready. According to the meat thermometer, we're about 10 degrees off being our hit target, and then I think we can pull it off and rest. So you can see this is quite a tiny brisket point end, but literally that's all it is. It's a small crummy point cut, but it will go excellent in some like pies or shredded or cut into cubes for burnt ends. So we'll see what we do with this thing when we pull it off. Almost done. This thing was sitting at about 203 internal, and it was probing like butter in all different spots. So we're ready to let this thing rest for a while. Because it's a small piece, I'm not going to go on air. I'm going to only let it rest about 20 minutes, but then we're good to go. Alright, so I'll let this thing rest for about 20-25 minutes. Let some moisture get back into it so it gets a bit more tender, and now we're slicing, and this thing is slicing with absolute ease. Great colour, great smoke ring, cutting real easily. Didn't end up pulling or making point ends, just wanted to get straight into this thing and demolish it. Also keeping in mind, like with any cut, you always want to slice against the grain, that way you get the perfect slices, the fat rendering's in the right position, and you get the perfect slice every time, so always cut against the grain. Alright, there we go. 6 hours has paid off. How juicy and moist that brisket is. Whew. Oh, moist, tender, incredible smoke flavour. I got the perfect amount of rub. Look at that smoke ring, like that smoke ring is beautiful. Not too dry, just the perfect amount of fat rendering in it. That bark is crispy as, it's hot. Oh. I hope that helps you all out with using your bullet smoker, smoking a nice brisket, or whatever you're cooking up. I hope it helps you out with loading your charcoal baskets, trimming your fat, and everything you need to get a perfect barbecue results. Cheers, Pitmasters.